Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, I am your host, Mrs. M, and I'm so excited to do an interview with Bree. Bree is one of our students. She's been with us for a while, and I know that Bree has done very, very, very well. She's won multiple $1 million in contracts, but I don't do a lot of interviews like this because I always feel if people may feel that this is the easiest way, easier than what you could imagine. And I think that a lot of people that are fortunate within like a year to win multiple $1 million in contracts are the exception, not the rule. But what I like to take away from the interviews is the consistency by asking, what are three things that you would say help you do well? So I'm going to open it up to Bree. I'm going to ask her if she could answer that very simple question, because when I've interviewed people that have won in a relatively short period of time millions of dollars in contracts, there seems to be similarities in things they do. And so I'm going to ask Bree, because the whole goal of this is for her to take her time to help individuals that are where she was with information that might like click. That's what we do this for, so others can hear, stay motivated, know that you have to put the work in, but that you can do it. So we've been fortunate to have a relationship with Bree. And like I said, she has done a lot of amazing things. So Bree, want to open it up with saying first, congratulations. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us. What would you say are let's go with three things, and I asked you a little bit before we did the interview, and you mentioned one that I thought was very interesting. But what would you say, number one, number two, and number three, for let's say someone that's been trying this, it hasn't worked for government contracts, just in general, or someone that just wants to know what can they really do? Like, what would you suggest? So let me give me three things that you would say.
Three things that I would say on what someone could do if they're not having
Right. Like,
success
what would
as
you
a fan.
say that has been your success? If you had, I know you've been doing this for about a little over a year now. You've won, close to millions of dollars. I don't really like to say, I know a lot of people do. That's just not my style. You've won millions of dollars in contracts, multiple million. What
Mhm.
would you say has been the consistent thing you've done? Is it the mindset? Is it who you know? What is it that you would say if you had to name three things that you've noticed that's given you success? What would it be?
I would think the first thing would be doing it afraid. I was terrified when I got
Okay.
started. I had won small contracts, like contracts for like bolts and screws and those kind of things, but going over into services um was just terrifying for me. And I think when I saw your information online and I had my conference call with you, and you're like, no, we're gonna do six figures and we're gonna knock it out. And I was like, well, let's go for the gold. I think have I think doing it afraid um was my biggest thing, being able to walk through that door. Um
That's a real good point you brought out, because I was speaking to someone today and they had won a multi-million dollar contract and somehow they ended up not being able to keep it. Whether the person, it wasn't any fault of theirs. I just think that the government had set aside money and something happened and they didn't get the contract. And so that's been years. But when I asked them, why do you think you're not at $1 million right now? Because you got everything that you need. The number one thing this person says is, because of what happened before, I'm afraid. And I love that you say you have to walk through the fear.
mhm,
People overestimate or underestimate the mindset. I always say the mindset is everything. It's
mhm,
everything. Because if you can't get your mind right, you're not going to look for the bids. You're not going to do any bidding. You're not going to do anything. You've got to
right.
find, your mind's got to get there. So you walk through the fear in spite of that you were afraid. What would you
Mhm.
say would be the second thing?
I would think the second thing would be I focused on things that I could do with
Okay.
confidence, right? I
Okay.
didn't pick something like, rocket science or, you know, screws for NASA or anything like that.
Anything
Well,
like
I mean,
that.
that's not a crazy thing. Screws are screws. But I just dealt with things were that made common sense
Okay, for you, that made common
for
sense.
me.
and you felt comfortable. So once you got over the fear, you then started looking for contracts that were a good fit for you. I always say when I was very fortunate to win a lot of contracts, it was in areas that I felt comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
I had to feel comfortable because I was ultimately the one that signed the contract. I'm the prime.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure that I felt comfortable. So you found success with feeling comfortable in areas that you were familiar with from previous, or you just said, I'm going to learn some stuff. So was it something in your background that you felt comfortable with moving forward with services, or did you learn it while was your learning curve while you were learning government?
So it was in my background, because my
Okay.
background is in water quality. So
Okay.
anything dealing with water quality or with public works or with maintenance or anything like that, I'm familiar with. And
Okay.
so I knew if I did that, I could not psych myself out from moving forward because I already know how to do it. Like I can fall forward, no matter what, this is what I do. So I can't psych myself out with the fear. Like, oh,
Okay.
you're moving forward, take 2 steps back. Right.
Right. Okay, so you kind of like with me, I wanted to start with something that I felt familiar with, and I wanted to make sure that I felt comfortable, but there were some areas that I didn't know, but I knew enough about enough. So it wasn't like 100% something new, like nursing, something I didn't know. My background was accounting. And so I started doing building services and things like that, doing the accounting. And then from there, started learning about, staffing. And next thing you knew, I felt like, okay, I could do this. Because one of the hardest things I think is the learning curve with government and your industry. It's
Hmm.
it's a challenge if because it's a learning curve for government, would you not say?
Yes, it's definitely a learning curve.
Definitely learning curve. So the last thing you kind of want is when you have no experience in your industry and absolutely no experience in government, because then that means you've got two things you've got to learn, and that can be a challenge.
Mm.
And what would you, so I know you've done the middleman, and that is a lot of different moving parts. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on there. Has
Hmm.
it been challenging to find someone once you find the work and you're the prime, and then you end up subbing it out, doing the middleman? That a lot of people say it's hard to find someone to do the work. Would you say that you've had success in that because of they take you seriously? Because why would you say you're successful at finding someone to actually do the work for you?
I think I'm successful in that because when I approach a subcontractor, I know that I'm paying. I know that the government is going to pay me. Even if they pay me slow, they're going to pay me.
Okay.
Right. So when I'm contacting and looking for people who have the capacity to do the work, I'm not second guessing myself. I know the
Okay.
money's coming. So I'm going through the numbers. You can do it or you can't.
Okay.
Right?
So
Just
you're
as if I
going,
was calling on getting my tires fixed. But I don't go,
okay.
you don't go through the emotionals up and downs. It's like, can you do it? Can you fit me in or you can't? So
Gotcha. So
yeah.
you know your numbers, you're calling. Are you allowing them to look at the scope of work and they give you the bid? Are you telling them this is what I need done and can you do it for this price?
I'm telling them this is what I need done. Give me a quote.
Gotcha. Because
And
I
give me a
know,
quote in 48 hours. If not, I move on.
gotcha. So you give them a time frame, you give them the scope of work. Because sometimes you can tell someone what you're going to pay and you leave money on the table because they were looking at doing it for less than that. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you say this is the scope of work and this is how much I'm looking to pay. Now I've had companies that did that with me and I loved it because especially when I was doing construction, there's no way I would have thought to charge that much. And in the beginning, because I wasn't as confident as I grew to get more confident. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, absolutely. I like the giving them statement of work, scope of work, telling them how much, and then moving forward. I know also that there is a lot of work in state, there's a lot of work locally, there's a lot of work federally. But one of the
Mm-hmm.
things I know you said before we got started is this one thing so you kind of elaborate a little bit on the system. So that you're kind of like the exception, not the rule, because you haven't been doing this long and you definitely have done well. Would you say that your success has been that you did trial and error? I know you went with what you knew, but would you
Mm-hmm.
say you said you kind of got to know the system? You spent time, you spent energy, you research. Is that correct?
That is correct. So I did a lot of research on our state website, looking for bids, breaking them down, uh, seeing what the requirements were, getting quotes. And before, when I was terrified, I would get the quotes and prep it and not submit it, but I got over that.
Okay.
But I did a lot of research. And so I'm confident with bidding on the state site. And with that, it's made me confident with bidding on other states, because a lot of times the state sites are they're duplicated,
Okay.
right? So like whoever they've purchased the software for them to put out the solicitations, they're identical.
Okay.
So it's been easier to also bid in other states because it's the same
Same
website basically.
kind of pattern. Now, this is
Mhm.
the $100 question. Isn't it where so are you registered in more than one state, or do you have partnerships with people? Because I've always understood that you have to be registered in the state, or is that not true?
I am registered in more than one state.
Gotcha. Because that's what
Mhm.
I did. Once I started realizing that I was able to find bids in that state, it was a no-brainer for me then to start being registered in those states.
Mhm.
So I'm seeing similarities without even knowing that. One, I knew that this was something that I wanted to do. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I knew that I wanted the freedom to do what I
Mhm.
wanted, when I wanted, and where. And so that was something that was important to me. So that was my big motivator. Some people have children, some people it's retirement, some people leave a 9 to 5, but you got to find that inner thing that drives you. Once
Mhm.
you know that, then you start coming up with systems and ways to do that. I too was working in a 9 to 5, so I had to do the middleman concept, which is subcontract. I always tell people they make it like middleman is something brand new. This has been going on for the ages, and most people say subcontracting. They don't really even use the term too much, the middleman method. But I know a lot of people do because so now this is another, this is a fact or fiction. Once you get everything set up, so a lot of people think when they do the middleman, they win the contract, they're the prime, they sub it, and they just wash their hands. What percentage are you having to babysit? Because you've got a 9 to 5, so what percentage are you having to put a lot in? Or because your subs are good, you really, once you get everything set up, you can kind of back up. What would you say?
I would say my subs are pretty great. So once I get everything set up, I can uh back up a little bit. They don't
Okay.
have direct communication with the owner of how do I say that? With the state, with my
Right.
content for the contract, right? So
Right.
any communication that happens, I do that communication. And usually I meet with my subs like 6:30 in the morning.
Okay.
They need to communicate, and I move that communication forward, and it's been pretty good. I would say, and I'm glad you asked this question. The benefit for me, or one of the biggest learning curves, is getting a sub um who has a bigger company, so to speak. So I
Okay.
know a lot of people are like, you do the middleman, go with the smaller kind of mom and pop kind of thing. And then that kind of leads into problems because they don't have the capacity. But if you go with somebody who's a giant in the industry that you're working with, you do not have to babysit them. They're just going to get it done because that's what they do. And to
So
me, it's worth
it's
making a
going.
little less money and
Mhm.
paying the goat in the industry, so to speak.
Okay, so what is the advantage for them? Because if they're big, they can do pretty much what you're doing. Is it because why would you think they would work with you?
Because they don't have a reason to turn down the money,
Okay,
right? So they don't have the contract. And I'm
gotcha.
calling and saying, hey, I need this done. Give me a quote. And they're like, sure, here you go.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you're working. When I did it, I know some people, they will go because there's like 3 ways. You can be the prime, you can look at subbing with a larger prime contract, a larger subcontractor, or a smaller one. I've
Hmm.
done the prime. I've subbed as I've been a subcontractor for someone, and I definitely know that the headache that I was spared, if I'm paying a good percentage, I'm either always say I'm either gonna be tired or I'm gonna be have little less money. I'm not gonna be both. I'm not gonna be
Hmm.
tired because I'm chasing up behind my subs that I'm paying good money to. That doesn't make sense to me. So I get what you're
Hmm.
saying. I would rather spend money to have it where it's done for me the right way. I don't lose a
Mhm,
contract. I get really, really great performance reports as opposed to saving money and having a headache and not being able to relax. One
mhm.
last question. What about payroll? So, are you finding companies? Because that's another thing. People are like, well, what if I don't have payroll? What if I don't have payroll? And we all know that invoice factoring can be a challenge. What is it? Have you saved up capital? Would you say the people that you're utilizing, they don't need money right away? So now you're in the system, you don't have to wait as long. What would you say is your answer to payroll?
I factor all of my invoices.
Wow.
Mhm,
So the invoice factoring does work well.
mhm. And
Okay.
it's beneficial. They take a small percentage, it's not a whole lot, but
Okay.
then I'm able to pay my contractors, my subcontractors, and cover everything. It's also beneficial because sometimes the government slow pays. So I have one state where I'm still waiting on a payment. Um, but because I'm factoring my invoice and so forth, I can still, pay my contractor.
So the factoring is great, but it does take a minute to set up. So if you're, let's say you're factoring your first contract invoices, would
Hmm.
you expect that factoring company to pay you in 60 days? Or is that realistic? Because I know there's things once you get in the system, you're good. That's with almost anything. Even when I've done contracts, once I've given them my W-9, I'm good. But in the beginning, it's a little bit crazy because they're inputting me. The accounting has to put it in. I've got to wait for them to input in the system. Once I get rolling, I'm good. What does it look like to wait for the invoice factoring? Are you looking at 60 days or what?
I
If
think when I did the first invoice factoring,
hmm,
it took about 2 weeks to get everything working, get everything in the system, get everything before I received payment.
okay.
Now that I'm in the system and everything's set up, I get paid within 3 days.
Oh wow.
Hmm.
Okay.
Depending on when I submit it to them. If I submit it early, great. But usually they try to pay me the next day. Like
Wow.
someone's out of office or something. It's like the longest is like 3 days.
Well, that is great. Well, thank you so much, Bree. Just to wrap up, I am so proud of you. I'm so glad that we were able to help you with some items when it comes to learning some things with, I think Bree started out at our GovCon Lunch and Learn, call it now, our GovCon Lunch and Learn, doing disaster relief information, middleman, and dibs. I think she had had a little success with dibs, like she said, bolts and things like that before she came, and then she went and did that very well. I think she found her first $1 million bid, like I think it was very
Hmm.
soon, like in 60 days. And
Hmm.
then to hear that you've now won one even higher than that, multiple from that, I'm just so proud. And we're just so proud that you were, one of our Crack the Gov Code students and that we can see your success. Like I said, I knew she was probably going to be exception, not the rule. So the takeaway is what can you do? Consistency, knowing, walk through the fear. There are ways out there to do invoice factoring. You may have to wait 2 weeks, but don't let the capital be something you're afraid of. Consistently learn the system. You can middleman this. And with states, I think you can middleman almost all of it. I don't think it's a limit like it is on some federal. So you can, I know I've done it where you can do it almost. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to register in different states. Some states have more contracts than others. I know I won a lot of contracts on the county level, on the state level, and on the federal level. And so thank you so much, Bree. I would love for you guys to click the link. That way you can come to our free GovCon Lunch and Learn. That's where Bree started, and she is doing very well. So make sure you click the link below. And until next time, be safe, take care, and we will see you later. Bye.